Every day that I have on earth is a gift and a blessing, and I'm very grateful for that because, frankly, people are disappearing. Scientists are going missing. Now they're saying they're going to investigate this. The president himself is saying they're going to look into this and see if anything's going on. It's a little bit scary. I got to say, it's a little bit scary, but you guys knew that I might still show up even though it was last minute and I've had a really rough week. Like, you know, that's kind of like every week, but somehow we keep on making it through all of this.
We're talking about some of the most advanced scientists tied to national security. So in a large population of people, of course, deaths occur. But when you're talking about this smaller pool of highly specialized individuals in a cluster in such a short period of time, it seems a little bit more unusual. I have to read some of this information from Amy Eskridge, who is one of the scientists who allegedly died of a reported self-inflicted gunshot wound. She was on a podcast in 2020, and she was saying that she was going to disclose she had discovered some anti-gravity propulsion information, and apparently that's widely discussed by UFO researchers who have claimed this advanced technology is what allows alien spacecraft to achieve impossible speeds. So she had discovered this. She was working on this anti-gravity, novel foundational work regarding anti-gravity. She was talking about how she was being targeted, both psychologically and physically, as well as a result of this. She was worried about her life.
Woo! As I was saying, I feel better now than I did before. I was in a pretty sad state of mind last week just because somebody just yelled at me in the street, as I talked to you guys about. And, you know, that's a pretty shocking and painful thing to go through for anybody. It wasn't at all what I expected, but it happens. There's some really, really exciting stuff I want to talk about today because as I was going through this, all this material, I realized that the number 31,680 was coming up very prominently by virtue of the fact that this year's crop formations were definitely doing callbacks to a classic one called Barbary Castle 1991. And here it is. Now, as you probably know, I've done many, many shows on this thing, many presentations on this thing, and in fact, this was, again, what you're looking at here is in wheat. This is a wheat field. So despite how amazingly geometric this is, what you see in all these diagonal lines from the top left to the bottom right is this concept of tractor lines. And there's about 30 feet between each set of these lines. So the reason why you see two lines is that there's two wheels on the tractor. So the tractor is going along and it has these long metallic things that water the crop in between. And that's how they keep everything hydrated. They have these big, long machines. So what the crop circle makers do, as I said last time, is they actually flatten out the crops. There are people who have witnessed this, and it only happens in less than a minute. You just literally see everything fall down right in front of you. There are incredible anomalies, including that the crops actually grow better after they've had a crop circle. And in my new show, A Sacred Science of Michael Prophecies, I do have video that I took in 2010 with a group in the crop circles in England where we showed that. So it's pretty exciting because crop circles are very, very cool looking. I mean, just take a look at this thing. It's like, what in the world? And I've always talked about this as if it was a dimensional shift indicator, because if you look at the top, it's like a point in a void. You see how that line goes into the middle of a big blank circle? Well, that could be like the first dimension, the idea of dimensionality just being a point of origin. Then on the bottom right, it looks like it's spinning into two dimensions now. It becomes like a pinwheel shape. And then, of course, on the left, it starts to ratchet upwards, and it becomes a three-dimensional shape, because if you look at that ratchet spiral as if it's going around a sphere, right? Think of it as a round sphere. That's part of what we see here. Now, there's some cool stuff also, because the ratchet spiral you just looked at, they measured that thing, and the exact length of it is 333 feet. The exact length, if you were to walk through that spiral step by step and measure it along the way, you get 333 feet. And there's a lot of really, really weird stuff associated with this formation, but again, it seems to implicate the idea of a dimensional shift. In other words, you have first dimension, second dimension, third dimension being the three circles on the outside. And then there's a fourth dimensional change, just making sure I'm still on the air. There's a fourth dimensional change, and that fourth dimensional change is illustrated by what you see in the center. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, but it is a tetrahedron, which is like a pyramid. So think of a pyramid that has a triangular base. So imagine that there's a triangular pyramid, it's sitting on a triangular base, and then it has these three lines coming up to the middle, which would be the big round circle in the center, the one that's the lightest colored. And so what we also see is rings around the center, and those rings actually correspond in terms of their angular relationships to a sphere inside the tetrahedron. So this is a very critical point, the idea of putting a tetrahedron inside a sphere. And in the research I've been doing for so many years now, we've uncovered, many years after I first found this, that that is the nature of the photon, that the photon itself is much more than what we think. The photon is very adaptive. It could be very small or it could be very large. And in fact, the whole universe is made from photons. And we've talked about this new science discovered by Dr. Nima Arkani-Hamed, where he found that there's this geometry that creates all of space and time. And he called it the amplituhedron, but it is a tetrahedron. So again, that's a lot of information. I know this stuff gets overwhelming, but the concept is the tetrahedron could be the only thing that really exists. There's no space, there's no time, there's just one shape which happens to look exactly like this, sort of. Well, the part in the middle. So if that is true, if that's really the universal geometry, then we've got a very exciting thing going on here. Because this science tells us that we're going through a dimensional shift. The crop circles in and of themselves carry this message, and they carry it redundantly. Now, when I first started to research UFOs, it was in 1993, and it was the result of hearing about Richard C. Hoagland and the work that he had done with the monuments of Mars. And he found a connection between this crop circle that you were just looking at, which again appeared in July 1991, and the actual angular positions of monuments on the planet Mars. This was very, very fascinating and truly dazzling to me to look at those correspondences and say, well, then he's also got a physics where he's saying that vortex points appear on planets based on this geometry, that as the planet rotates, this tetrahedral geometry is appearing somehow virtually inside the sphere of the planet. So the planet is a sphere. We said, you got to put the tetrahedron inside the sphere. Then we see these vortex points appearing, like Hawaii is at 19.5 degrees north, and 19.5 degrees north is exactly where 3 out of the 4 points of the tetrahedron will be. If you take, for example, the tetrahedron, put 1 point on the South Pole, you'll get 3 more that are all at 19.5 in the Northern Hemisphere. And I'll show you more illustrations of this. I'm just setting it up a little bit. So Richard C. Hoagland found that there was this weird energetic thing going on, and it seemed like the tetrahedron was causing the great red spot on Jupiter, the great dark spot on Neptune. It controlled where the sunspots went on the sun. It controlled where the cloud bands were on Saturn. Lots and lots of interesting stuff, all 19.5 related. So you got to remember, back in the time that I found this book, 1993, Monuments of Mars, he had connected something that was clearly extraterrestrial with monuments on another planet in our solar system and in advanced new physics. And this was all very, very exciting stuff to me. I was really, really thrilled by what Richard C. Hoagland was doing. And I met in his discussion forum in 1996 a man who was into a lot of the same stuff I was into, dreams and synchronicity, this kind of stuff. And his name was Joe Mason. And Joe Mason got me on the phone. And this was actually the night before I had the Archangel Michael contact. So the night I spoke to Joe Mason on the phone was November 9th, 1996. Okay, so this was at the beginning of the internet. It was dial-up internet. Nobody even had broadband. You couldn't even use video. The only way you could really get anything off of the internet that you could enjoy other than text was through audio. And so the radio show Art Bell was the big show, Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. And Richard C. Hoagland was the premier guy on the show with 20 million listeners. And he was always talking about the face on Mars, that there was a mountain on Mars that looked like a human face. So this was pretty incredible stuff. And the human face was one thing, and I'd seen that going all the way back to the 1970s from stuff that I'd looked at in astronomy magazines for kids. There was an astronomy magazine called Odyssey for kids, and sure enough, it had this image of the face on Mars, and it was quite stunning to me at the time. So, yeah, it was a pretty fascinating thing to find out that crop circles had illustrated this weird sacred geometry of a tetrahedron inside a sphere, which is then showing up in planets, and now we find out it's the photons, it's the whole universe is made of this strange geometry. But then I found this guy, Joe Mason, in Hoagland's forum, and he gets me on the phone on November 9th, 1996, and one of the things that he told me really, really blew me away. He told me that there's 31,680 square feet. Somebody just said, all you people are butt jobs. Inside the comments. Okay, well, I don't know if that's really true, but there are trolls in there. You don't need to insult them, though. So anyway, there's 31,680 square feet within the circular areas, and this number actually means the New Jerusalem in passages from the Bible, including the book of Revelation. If you use this science of Hebrew gematria, it turns out that the number 31,680 actually corresponds to the New Jerusalem. Very specifically, there's this whole bunch of stuff in the Bible about the New Jerusalem. And in fact, those passages are very complex, and it's beyond anything I wanted to do in a short live stream like this. However, I will say that this has all been explained in a book called The Dimensions of Paradise by John Mitchell. And so it was incredibly fascinating for me that I have been through reading this book already, and it was very difficult to read. I wasn't really an enthusiastic John Mitchell reader. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, but it's very dense, it's very mathematical. But again, the whole point was that he had found these passages in the book of Revelation at the very end. This is like Revelations 21 and 22. That's the end of the Bible. Revelations 22 is the very last thing there is. So at the very end of the Bible, there's this weird geometric code that they give out in terms of what they call the New Jerusalem. And in the book of Revelation, it gives you all these strange measurements. It's talking about 12,000 of these and 144 of these. And it doesn't seem to really make sense, but then John Mitchell in his book decoded all this. So basically, the whole book is made to talk about the importance of this number, 31,680. So you can imagine how blown away I was when I get Joe Mason on the phone after meeting him in this discussion forum, and we're all talking about Richard Hoagland's work together. And one of the first things he tells me is, yeah, you know that Barbary Castle image that he keeps showing? There's 31,680 square feet if you add up the square footage of all the circles put together. Well, what does this really mean? This means that the Barbary Castle formation is an illustration of the New Jerusalem. It's a prophecy of the New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem actually represents the dimensional shift. It represents the transformation of the particles in our reality. That's what's so cool about it. So there's a lot of really, really fascinating areas to explore here, but the main reason I wanted to go through this today is to talk about many other aspects of the book of Revelation as well. So part of what we're going to do is just show you how the whole book of Revelation is loaded with this bizarre prophecy stuff that seems very relevant to today, which all leads up to the New Jerusalem, which again is 21:22. It's the end of the book. There's nothing left to do after that. So if you consider what we're really seeing here, the New Jerusalem is oddly relevant to what's happening right now because there is a war happening right near and around Jerusalem. And we're in it. So all of the other things that we saw in the last episode regarding the prophecies of crop circles from 2023 clearly, we saw, for example, lots of wicker basket formations, and I discussed how the Wicker Man represents, there was a movie from, I think, 1972, where it describes a pagan cult on a small island, and there's a police officer who goes there to arrest everybody, or whoever was responsible for this girl's loss. And in fact, they don't want the murder being investigated. They lure him into walking into a big man made out of sticks. I mean, this is a wicker man. So if you've ever seen Burning Man, and the idea of burning some big human effigy out of twigs, you know, it could be that the thing's 20 feet tall, and you might not even walk somebody in until they're halfway up from the bottom. But the problem was, he didn't realize he was being walked into this wicker man. Only once he got inside and then they locked the door on him and they set it on fire did he realize they were burning him to death. So it's a very dark movie. It's considered a horror movie. It's in the horror genre. And Wicker Man is something that my insider, who claims to have worked on a covert level for the Clintons and had a lot of really dark stuff that he told me, he said that the Wicker Man is the prototypical cabal movie. What you've got here is an illustration of exactly what they do. In other words, they're all in on it. Everybody on the island is in on it. And if anybody investigates them, it's curtains for the investigator. And they do it in this weird ceremonial way. Now, are they doing that now? No, they're not literally burning people now. I mean, maybe in some horrific situations that happens, but a lot of it now is just done by character assassination. So it's a lot less expensive to ruin people's lives through things that you can do online with people sitting at a desk than it is to hurt them. And so hurting people physically doesn't really seem to be that necessary anymore. They can get a lot done just with what they have as the tools of the trade. You know, and I've suffered through this. My ex-wife and I suffered through this together for many years. We held up for a long time, but it was incredible. I mean, we were under just the most outrageous attack. Really, really crazy stuff that you could ever imagine. And I think in time that's all going to start to be more known about, but we'll see. So again, a lot of this stuff bounced back to the tetrahedron, and this illustration showed the tetrahedron, and that was in 1991, but then they came back and gave us some other examples that really, really nailed it. So like Woodborough Hill, July 22nd, 2009, is probably the best one they ever did to really show you this new physics. And we'll get back to the Wicker Man. It's all interconnected. So this is pretty cool because now what you're seeing is the tetrahedron, where you got the triangular base, you've got the circles around the nodes, right? So you look at this, it's like, whoa, damn. This is a scientific geometric diagram of the tetrahedron geometry inside a sphere, where each of the corners of the tetrahedron have spheres around them, which is, again, pretty similar looking to this. It's just like you kind of, instead of tilting it down on its, making it flat, now you've kind of like tilted it up and made it three-dimensional. So here's Woodborough Hill 2009 from a distance. And here's another photograph of it. It's just an absolutely gorgeous formation. If you look at it straight down, you get a really nice black and white contrast to the way it looks. And if you take a side angle shot when the sun is setting, then you get these really cool shadows like this. Another example that really nailed it on the head was the Merkaba Formation 2017. And once again, it's like, ooh, yeah, there's your tetrahedron. But another one, which I really, really wanted to get to today, and this is one of the things that just, it's been haunting my mind. It's been haunting my mind because this formation, I had to find out where it was. I couldn't remember. I went back to Crop Circle Connector. I went through years and years, and I finally found it in August 2013. I believe this was the finale formation of the season, and it appeared on August 13th, 2013. So here we go. Now, there's some very, very interesting stuff going on here. Oops, I'm not on my slide. I burped and you had to see that. Tried to cover those. Anyway, here we go. This is really amazing because, again, what do we see? There's a lot of strange stuff going on here. First of all, we do see a tetrahedron, don't we? That's right in the middle where the triangle is. And you can see the lines that make the tetrahedron, but it turns into a crown. It's like a human head is being crucified, and there's a crown. There's actually, as you can see, a halo around the head. And then there's these stylized beams of light coming off of the head. So this looks like it's an image of Jesus, and it might actually even be an image of Jesus crucified. We'll get to that in just a second. Now, there's then a series of circles around it, and this concentric circle motif again illustrates the physics that it's not just one tetrahedron inside a sphere that started the whole universe. It fractalizes out and creates the whole universe. All the universe is made of atoms and molecules, which apparently are photonic in nature. They're ultimately made of photons. So the stuff that we think is real is actually made of light, and it's light that is created by vibration, interestingly enough. Now, this formation is really bizarre because it actually has a Christian symbolic connotation to the tetrahedron. And so Joe Mason, the same guy who trained me on all this stuff back in 1996, in 2013, he wrote a brilliant article connecting this formation to Salvador Dali's classic painting, Christ of St. John of the Cross. So here is the crop circle from 2013, and here is the image of Christ of St. John of the Cross. So it's interesting because Salvador Dali's image does create a tetrahedron between the two hands of Christ and the head. And just so that you get a sense of it, this is the whole image, okay? This is the full painting. And this is the detailed view of what we see up at the top. So it's pretty fascinating because it's not just that this crop circle resembles Dali's painting, it's the fact that Dali made this painting based upon an inspiration that he had in a dream where he said that he was seeing a tetrahedron that was the source of the universe, folks. So then he'd made this illustration based on his dream. So let's go back to that so you can see. Okay, so once again, here is the illustration of the crop formation. This was from 2013. And then on the right, we have the Christ of St. John of the Cross. And again, they're very similar, and they seem to have solved Dali's puzzle, as we'll see in a minute here. So again, there's the whole illustration. Here it is up close. And when we look at this formation and we compare it to St. John of the Cross, which is, again, part of what Dali's painting was called St. John of the Cross. Well, here's a stained glass window that's got St. John of the Cross hanging upside down, which, again, is very similar to this formation. And we also have the image of a pendulum. You'll notice that it looks like underneath St. John there is this pendulum and is swinging back and forth. Well, that appears to indicate how we're swinging in the balance. History is swinging in the balance. But we're all on the cosmic crucifix as well. That's another part of this, is that we as a planet are going through this cosmic crucifixion. So the crop circle makers seem to have directly endorsed Salvador Dali's vision. So Joe Mason, in this article from 2013, which you're going to see the link to now, he delineated from a Facebook post quotes from Dali where he talks about the dream that he had. Check this out. So you can go and look to this link, and that's where you can read everything I'm about to share with you. By far the most popular of all of Dali's religious works is without a doubt his Christ of St. John of the Cross, whose figure dominates the Bay of Port Ligat. I guess that's what's in the background. The painting was inspired by a drawing preserved in the Covenant of the Incarnation in Avila, Spain, and done by St. John of the Cross himself after he saw this vision of Christ during an ecstasy. At the bottom of his studies for the Christ, Dali wrote the following. Now, this is where it gets really amazing. So this kind of stuff gets me very excited. I'll just say that right up front. Because, again, the tetrahedron is nothing new. Just because Salvador Dali saw this in a dream in 1950 doesn't make it less valuable than the physics insights we're having now. His higher self, whatever creates his dreams, already knew that this is what the universe really is like. So here we go. He says, in the first place, in 1950, I had a cosmic dream in which I saw this image in color, and which in my dream, it represented the nucleus of the atom. Okay, so remember all this. 1950, cosmic dream, color image of the nucleus of the atom. And this is what he saw. So this is the actual Salvador Dali illustration of what he thought was going on and what he was seeing in his dream. So first of all, it kind of looks like a flying triangle on the right there. It's a typical type of UFO. But then on the left, yeah, we have what really does look tetrahedral. There's 3 nodes. In this case, there's 2 on the top, 1 in the middle, and then kind of a tail coming off of it on the bottom. Now, the one in the middle is different colored than the other 2, but it does still look tetrahedral. And the one in the middle seems to be shooting out more stuff. But he said this was the nucleus of the atom. Isn't that bizarre? Then he goes on. At the bottom of his Studies for the Christ, Dali wrote, again, we're just repeating this, it's representing the nucleus of the atom. Then he said, the nucleus later took on a metaphysical sense. I considered it to be the very unity of the universe, the Christ. In the second place, when, thanks to the instructions of Father Bruno, a Carmelite, I saw the Christ drawn by St. John of the Cross, I worked out geometrically a triangle and a circle, which aesthetically summarized all my previous experiments, and I inscribed my Christ in this triangle. So yeah, this is stuff that I like to geek out on, because what we see is that Salvador Dali is telling us that the whole universe is made of this Christ consciousness. And he was looking at what the Christ consciousness actually was, and he was seeing it as the nucleus of the atom. So now it's associated with the New Jerusalem in these various crop formations because, again, Barbary Castle 1991 had 31,680 square feet in all the circles. And 31,680, if you read the whole book, Dimensions of Paradise by John Mitchell, the whole book is basically about this number and how this number was in the Bible in code from Hebrew gematria. So you take each of the letters, Aleph, whatever they are, they each have a number, and these are fixed. They don't change. So you know, okay, the first 10 numbers, 1 through 10, are the first 10 letters of the alphabet, and then it starts going up by 10. And as you get into these weird and less used letters at the end of the alphabet, like X, Y, and Z, X and Z in particular are very crashing sounds with the mouth that we don't use as often. Those have very high scores. So then you can count up numbers a lot faster that way. So I believe that one of the Bible passages in Mitchell's book that adds up to 31,680 is, the leaves of the tree are made for the healing of nations. So that's an example. And then there's other passages that actually say the New Jerusalem that add up to 31,680 as well. So it's a fascinating thing. And again, this idea of Christ and a tetrahedron being connected is nothing new, as we see in this illustration. This is from a church, and again, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. As we see, this is very much connected to Kabbalistic illustrations, and that's really kind of what it is. It's the bottom of the Sephirotic tree of life from the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mysticism and this tradition about the geometric pattern that we saw last time in the crop formation. So again, Salvador Dali's vision says that this is the nucleus of the atom, but that it's also the essence of Christ. And now the crop formations are showing us this weird new physics, and I decoded the physics. I figured out what the heck is going on. So now I want to again review for you how the crop formations of 2023 were showing us this same pattern. So I talked about this one, for example, and I said, yeah, it looks like a propeller, and it could be free energy because instead of it being wind power, it's more like the barrow on the left. And those barrows are powered by earth energy. They're powered by geomagnetic currents. So with that kind of earth energy in place, you don't need anything else. The barrow itself there actually will create energetic healing. So if you were to go inside these, and that's what they used to do, they'd have a little room you'd go into. You meditate in there and you actually experience healing. It will actually cause you to get healthier. Your wounds will heal. bodily problems will heal, cognitive issues will heal, you get a psychological healing. And again, if you see how they're connected to each other, the propeller, it looks like propeller, but it's also got waves of energy coming off of it. And again, it's got this very tetrahedral shape. We talked about the fleur-de-lis pattern, this kind of womb, as I was saying it was. And that, again, there's a lot of stuff we can do there with the tetrahedron and how the three leaves coming together are tetrahedral. They make a series of these little triangles. And it's the same kind of stuff. You got this leaf pattern. Now, this and one other shape, I didn't have time to get the slide together, but this and one other shape add up to Michael, which is the Hebrew word for Archangel Michael, M-I-K-A-L, in Gematria, believe it or not. The actual number of different squares that we see and the different individual shape elements that we see with this plus one other formation, one of them was 47, the other one was like 117 or something like that. I forget the exact numbers, but anyway, they add up to the actual name for Archangel Michael. So this is now being interpreted by many, not just me, as Archangel Michael's shield. And again, here's another illustration of it. It's tetrahedral, right? You've got the same kind of deal. You've got the three leaves, which look like the three corners of the tetrahedron. You've got this bendy shield with the geometry on it, which is, again, wicker basket geometry. And the wicker basket symbolizes, this time, it's the DS that's in trouble, not us. All the lights are pointed on them, and some of these other formations keep showing you the all-seeing eye, that the light is now on them, the periscope is pointed to them, and we even had the symbol of NATO show up in the midst of all these wicker basket formations. And again, the wicker basket is associated with the overthrow of someone. Now, in the past, in the movie, it's the guy that's investigating them, but I think the tables are turning now. So we also talked about this formation, which was another example, yet again, of the same thing I've been talking about, the tetrahedron geometry inside the sphere, and it was a callback to the first illustration used for the Circular magazine made by the guys who started the crop circle connector, one of whom is named Mike Green. So, I want to talk a little bit about this 19.5 thing that Richard C. Hoagland was so into. This is the diagram I was alluding to of his tetrahedron as it appears inside a planet. So the 19.5 degree point, in this case on the red one, is again north of the South Pole. So you put the point on the South Pole, then you got three vortexes that are at 19.5, and they're all 120 degrees apart from each other, because that's what a triangle does. It cuts the circle up into three equal pieces that add up to 360. Now, what you were just looking at in these crop formations looks a lot like sp3 electron orbitals. Look at that. You can connect the orbitals together, and boom, you've got your tetrahedron again. Isn't that really fascinating? So these are not just theoretical concepts, folks. These are actual real-world physics principles that iterate into our reality, such as the sp3 electron orbitals. But it's also doing this really weird stuff on planets. And again, this data originally came from Dr. Tom Bearden. And Bearden is a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army Military Research and Development. And he's done some amazing, amazing stuff. So Hoagland's thing was all about, let's look at the crop circles and see what they're telling us about this tetrahedral geometry. So we have the Barbary Castle 91. He talked about this a lot. And again, we mentioned the 31,680 square feet. Now, when I got into Richard C. Hoagland's discussion forum, one of the things that Joe Mason told me was very amazing, and it was this. Genesis 8:4 describes the Ark of the Covenant as appearing on the 17th day of the 7th month. And interestingly, it was on July 17th, 1991, that this all-important formation appeared. So the Ark of the Covenant appeared on the 17th day of the 7th month. And here it is, July 17th, 1991. So this apparently does represent the Ark of the Covenant. Well, again, this is all symbolic, and the Ark of the Covenant was a very powerful device that Moses had created, which led to things like that they were able to melt a wall into liquid. The bricks just melted down like they were liquid. The Ark of the Covenant creates incredible power, and whoever is using it is essentially in a godlike state. And again, I believe that when you look at the Michael prophecies and what I just spent the last 2 years doing, working on 7 books that are now completed, thank God, and they are available at https://thedisclosure.com. I do want to get that in there. I'm very proud of what I've done because they keep showing us this physics, and then Richard Hoagland got stuck on the tetrahedron, but they also illustrated things like the cube in the sphere. So it's all the geometries, all these 5 Platonic solids that factor in. And in fact, that's what we see. There's a whole new science that the crop formations were indicating exists, where we now build the universe off of photons, but we see photons as geometric resonance points in the etheric medium itself. So these are actually vibrations in the ether, and that's illustrated in some of the formations. Here's another one that kind of shows a stylized tetrahedron in a weird and interesting way. And there's also spirals going in that are correlated with DNA in other formations we can talk about. This is where you see the sound vibration concept coming in. And again, the key is fluid dynamics. As I've said so many times, this particular image is what we see from the vibration of a liquid. And normally the liquid would just look white if you looked at it in this particular method. But then when you vibrate the liquid, it turns into this. Now, why is it doing that? It's doing that because there's particles in the liquid, and you vibrate it with a pure sound frequency like one of the white keys on the piano. And with just that alone, with nothing else except the white keys on the piano, these pure sound vibrations, you play the vibrations into this liquid, and the particles now arrange into this geometry. So this appeared to be, as I started to speculate on what Hoagland was doing and then eventually became one of his colleagues, we were speculating on, okay, well, how do you get this 19.5 degree phenomenon, which I'll now talk about. So we have another illustration of a cymatics where you again see the tetrahedron. This is just a liquid in vibration. And so the theory is, okay, these are pressure currents that appear in both liquid magma and in the atmosphere. And so again, this is my illustration based off of Richard C. Hoagland's diagram of the 2 interconnected tetrahedrons, or the Merkaba, which the crop circles are showing us over and over again. So we see this again appearing at 19.5 degrees north or south, and there's a bunch of examples of this. Sunspots always seem to cluster around 19.5. So here's just a typical picture of sunspots, but then, whoa, when you put the tetrahedron in there, you notice that the sunspots are very neatly appearing right along where these energetic node points are. And again, the basic idea is that there's something that makes the planet or makes the sun, the gravity itself that's flowing in is fluid-like. Now, when I say flowing in, wait a minute. Isn't gravity pulling us down? The new model is that gravity is pushing into the Earth. Gravity is the energy that makes the Earth and makes all the atoms on the Earth, and it's pushing in all at once from every direction. And so it's a fluid-like energy, and as it's flowing into the Earth, it actually creates these fluid vibrations, similar to what we see in the vibration of the fluid, creating those sand patterns we just saw, the patterns of the triangles. It's very interesting that apparently the sun is doing this, right? Because here it is. There's your tetrahedron, there's your sunspots, and sure enough, they all appear right around where the tetrahedral points are. Here's another illustration showing how they cluster right around these areas. Jupiter's Great Red Spot is the classic example Richard was always going into. Isn't it weird that if you drew the tetrahedron in there, right where this storm exists, it's been spinning in the same place for 400 years since the dawn of the telescope in the 1600s? It's never moved. And it's right at the 19.5 degree latitude. Whoa, okay, that's pretty weird. We also see cloud bands that appear on Jupiter around 19.5. As you can see in this illustration, there's one below the equator and above the equator, and it's a darker color. And here it is again, and here it is again. We also see cloud bands on Saturn once again, notice there's a sharp delineation in color between the light colored area and the darker colored area, and the boundary is right around the 19.5 degree point. It's amazing. And there it is. You can see it's on the top and the bottom. Neptune has a great dark spot as well, and once again, boom, it turns out, I mean, they didn't quite put the rings on right here, but it is again exactly at 19.5. And then we also found that there was this night side glow of Venus, and the glow is geometric. So what you see on the left is these charged oxygen particles, and the oxygen particles are glowing, and there's much more of this charged oxygen in Venus's atmosphere. It's increased by like 2,500% over just a couple decades. So if you actually look at the shape of where the charged oxygen is appearing, it's tetrahedral. Right along, I drew this guy in on the left there. You can see that up the left-hand side of the tetrahedron is where all the charged particles are appearing. So it does appear that inside Venus's atmosphere, or inside the planet itself, there's this energetic tetrahedron. And you can actually see it based on where the oxygen appears, because the oxygen is coming right off of the geometry itself. Very, very cool. And so this was taken by Jeremy Bailey, and I just added the geometric diagram. And then when you get a solid planet, and for a long time this really confounded me, you get volcanoes. So on Mars, there's a large volcano at 19.5 called Olympus Mons. It's 3 times taller than Mount Everest, and it's exactly at 19.5 degrees. So here's an illustration where, oops, let's get that on camera, where you're going to see the 19.5 degree point. See those 3 guys on the left? That's all geometric, isn't it? They're all in a line. But now you're zooming in on the big volcano, and this is exactly at 19.5. And again, it's the most massive thing in the whole solar system. So pretty amazing. And we're now just still zooming around it. So why is this thing so big? Why is it 3 times taller than Mount Everest? And remember, Mars is a lot smaller than the Earth. Well, apparently the reason why is that it's exactly right at the 19.5 degree point. And then here on Earth, of course, we have Hawaii, which again, look at that. There's Hawaii where the star is, and there's 15 degrees, 30 degrees. So sure enough, if you look at the big island, it's right about 19.5, right in that neck of the woods. It's pretty amazing. And we also see strange geometry in Mars's ice caps. They melt along geometric lines. As you can see here, it looks like a hexagon. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but just to show you there's more than tetrahedrons going on. Jupiter at the North Pole, if you look at the areas that are orange, that's where it's hot. And if you look at the areas that are black, that's where it's cold on the left. And on the right, we see this in, I think it's ultraviolet or infrared. So they even call it a quasi-hexagon, but if you put the dodecahedron over it, like, ooh, wow. Look at that. Somehow, and don't, I'm still not sure I completely understand why, but there's a differential in temperature on Jupiter between the cold areas and the hot areas, where the top and bottom pentagonal faces are exactly where it's cold, and then there's a sharp boundary, and all of a sudden it gets very hot, with nothing in between. So it's the faces of the geometry that are changing temperature. And it's a very, very curious phenomenon. And so here again, I'm doing it without any other visuals in the way so you can see it. And then Saturn has a strange hexagon on its north pole. So you can see it here and here. There's some kind of weird hexagonal geometry up there. And it's like, well, what in the world is that doing there? Let's make sure I show it to you. I'm not sure if you saw that either. So this is the other one, the other illustration of it. You can look closely and look in the middle, and sure enough, there's a hexagon there. So like, wait a minute. Our science doesn't talk about this. Yeah, because there's this fluid-like geometry that's causing these things to happen, like the dodecahedral boundary of temperature in Jupiter's atmosphere, like the Saturn polar hexagon, and like the 19.5 degree vortex points. So again, for many years, I'm like, why in the world would it be showing up in Hawaii and on this weird volcano on Mars? And the answer is that the lava is spinning in the shape of a tetrahedron inside the Earth. If we actually modeled the flow of the lava inside the Earth, it's going to be tetrahedral, and it spins at these vortex points, which then on Mars becomes Olympus Mons, and on Earth it becomes Hawaii. very volcanically active points. So that's how the physics actually works. So then we see the same thing, 19.5 again on Saturn's moon Titan. And so this was totally incredible because it's like, here's this weird heat surge on Titan, and you look at where it is, and you even have the illustrations there on the right, and sure enough, it's 19.5. Bang! So this is an interplanetary phenomenon, and it also happened on Neptune, where Great Dark Spot had a hyperdimensional pole shift, and it actually moved from the southern latitude to the northern latitude, but it stayed at 19.5. And so even though you can't actually see anything here, they needed computers to figure this out. These are the illustrations of Neptune as it went through its Great Dark Spot pole shift. So again, it's like you really need analytical tools to properly understand what you're looking at here, but there it is. How in the world would it make a hyperdimensional pole shift? Well, remember, there's two tetrahedrons in the geometry. They're like interconnected like a Merkaba. And so you could have, apparently, the geometric point can shift from the north latitude to the south latitude or vice versa. And that's what we saw happening here. So this really was an interplanetary phenomenon. And now they're like, well, we don't know what's going on because now the Great Dark Spot moved to the northern latitude, but now it's trapped in a new area. And that's 19.5. Well, we know why. We know why. So this was the juice of the Richard Hoagland model, and it was amazing. We had this physics about volcanoes appearing like Hawaii and Olympus Mons. The reason why Olympus Mons is 3 times taller than Everest is it is apparently a manifestation of this volcanic uplift. Caused by what? Caused by a tetrahedron. Same thing with Hawaii, same thing with Great Red Spot, Great Dark Spot, cloud bands on Saturn, cloud bands on Jupiter, sunspots on the sun, the bright spot on Titan. I mean, it goes on and on. So then when I found Joe Mason, and we were all just really excited about this, and Hoagland had only really taken it where we got Barbary Castle 1991, this amazing crop circle, shows us a tetrahedron, and we see it on planets. Then I meet Joe Mason, and he's telling me, wait a minute, you got to remember Dali's vision. And Salvador Dali saw that this was not only the nucleus of the atom, but it was actually the Christ consciousness itself. Isn't that weird? So at the end of the book of Revelation, it uses this number 31,680 in code, which means the New Jerusalem. And this number again appears as the square footage of all of the rings put together inside Barbary Castle 91. And I believe that prophecy, the reason why they did that in 91 was meant for us to understand now, because there's problems happening right around Jerusalem right now. And all this year's crop formations clearly wanted us to go back and look at Barbary Castle 91 again, because they all show you the tetrahedron. So in order to set up why 31,680 is so critical in the book of Revelation, I want to talk about some of the very strange things where this might not be as obscure of a book as you think. So this kind of stuff is a little bit disturbing, but I want to bring it out because I think it's very significant. And again, Michael has told us we're not going to be experiencing catastrophic Earth changes. So back to the slide now. I'm so used to telling somebody to change slides, I do it to myself. Isn't that funny? So the first thing, which I'll probably talk more about next time, and I'm not going to do it this time because I just didn't have enough time to put a lot of stuff together, is the collapsing of 2 olive trees and or lampstands in the book of Revelation. And I wrote an article series called Revelation on the Revelation. It's way back in my early website writings from maybe like 2001 or thereabouts. Maybe even earlier than that. And I propose with some pretty compelling scriptural evidence that the collapsing of the olive trees or lampstands is the 2 towers of. And again, I want to get into this more, so I've left some things for next time.